minute now! Stand by!
The Longest Day wasn't just a war movie, it was a military operation disguised as a cinema. 5 directors commanded separate units, 3 languages created translation chaos, 20,000 plus extras stormed fake beaches, and John Wayne's paycheck sparked more fury than the actual invasion. Hit the beach. This production doesn't wait for reinforcements. These are 20 weird facts about The Longest Day. Before The Longest Day became the most expensive war film ever made, there was just Darryl Zanuck sitting in a Paris hotel room in 1960 reading Cornelius Ryan's best-selling account of D-Day. At 58, he was a studio titan who'd survived Hollywood's golden age by gambling big. This wasn't just another war movie, it was an idea that could bankrupt a studio or redefine the genre. Zanuck hired 5 directors because shooting simultaneously across multiple countries in 3 languages required it. Ken Anakin handled the British sequences. Andrew Martin directed the Americans. Bernhard Wicki filmed the Germans. Each commanded their own unit, literally. Zanuck became the de facto general, managing egos like platoons. At times, the biggest war wasn't on screen, it was in the editing room. Because The Longest Day was born in obsession and one man's refusal to make D-Day look like anything less than hell. The extras standing in the surf weren't just playing soldiers, many of them were soldiers, the real ones who'd actually stormed Normandy on June 6, 1944. Zanuck hired them because they knew how to move, how to fall, how to look terrified while running toward machine gun fire. They stood in Corsican waves wearing the same uniforms they'd worn 17 years earlier, some recognizing the layout even though the beach was wrong. During one take on the landing craft scene, a French veteran froze mid-action. Cameras kept rolling. He stood there, water up to his knees, hands shaking, tears streaming down his face. Zanuck walked into the surf himself, put a hand on the man's shoulder, and quietly told him to take the rest of the day off. No questions, no explanations needed. The crew reset, they shot the scene again, but everyone understood what had just happened. Because for some of these men, The Longest Day wasn't acting, it was ghosts made visible, trauma given a second dress rehearsal. John Wayne, Henry Fonda, Richard Burton, Sean Connery, Robert Mitchum. The cast list reads like a phone book of legends. Fonda committed to 10 days of shooting. Burton gave them 2. Connery showed up for exactly 1 day, delivered his lines, stormed a bunker, and left to become James Bond. The scheduling team worked in shifts, juggling star availability like battlefield commanders repositioning troops. Producers joked that if they'd waited another week, they would have needed closing credits just for the contracts. Some actors never met each other despite appearing in the same film. It was Hollywood's biggest roll call of 1962, 42 international stars crammed into one production, and it still barely fit on the poster. John Wayne wasn't landing on Omaha Beach without fighting his own war first. When Zanuck offered him $100,000, Wayne laughed and demanded $250,000, 10 times what most of the cast was making. Zanuck balked. Wayne didn't budge. He knew his box office value, knew that his name on the poster meant Middle America would show up. Zanuck caved. Word spread across the production like wildfire. Other actors joked that Wayne's paycheck should have gotten its own trailer. Robert Mitchum reportedly muttered, "I'm storming a beach for grocery money while the Duke's buying a ranch." But Wayne delivered. He limped through explosions with a broken ankle and gave Lieutenant Colonel Vandervoort a gravitas that turned a small role into an iconic one. Because in The Longest Day, even the Duke had to fight for his territory. And he won, the way he always did. Every sand dune, every bunker, every inch of beach you see in The Longest Day, that's Corsica, not Normandy. The real French beaches were off limits in 1961, still politically sensitive, still considered dangerous terrain. Unexploded ordnance remained buried in the sand, so production moved south. The art department hauled thousands of tons of sandbags, miles of barbed wire, concrete bunkers built to exact German specifications. They transformed Corsican coastline into a replica invasion zone so detailed that military historians later used the film for reference. Locals watched in awe. Some thought war had returned. By the end of shooting, locals joked that America had invaded Corsica, just this time with cameras instead of rifles, and Robert Mitchum instead of Eisenhower. Before Sean Connery ordered martinis shaken not stirred, he stormed a beach in a British uniform. The Longest Day was his last film before Dr. No made him James Bond. He shot his scenes in late 1961, and by October 1962, Bond was born. Ironically, his role as Private Flanagan, a soldier separated from his unit navigating occupied France, plays like Bond without the gadgets. You can see the swagger forming, the calm under fire. It's 007 in fatigues, a preview of the legend about to emerge. The film was released after Dr. No, so audiences watched it backward, seeing Bond storm Normandy, wondering why he didn't have a Walther PPK. The explosions weren't movie magic, they were actual explosives detonated by demolition experts who sometimes miscalculated. During one beach assault sequence, a charge went off early, 3 seconds before actors cleared the blast radius. Sand, debris, and shrapnel surrogates flew across the set. Cameramen dove behind equipment. A few extras were burned and bruised. Zanuck walked over, surveyed the damage, checked on the injured, then said, "Now that's realism." He didn't halt production, he ordered the scene reset and told the effects team to maybe count to 5 next time. Different decade, different safety standards. The footage made the final cut. You can see actors flinching for real, diving with genuine fear in their eyes, because The Longest Day didn't fake danger. It courted it, filmed it, and called it authenticity. Every German line is spoken in German, every French line in French, every English line in English. No dubbed voices. Zanuck insisted on linguistic authenticity even though it tripled production complexity. Scenes had to be shot multiple times for each language market. Translators stood on set like battlefield medics, rushing between directors and actors. The German crew, led by director Bernhard Wicki, filmed entirely in German. The French scenes were directed in French. Editing took months longer than planned. Some actors struggled with unfamiliar languages and had to be dubbed anyway. But for audiences, the effect was transformative. The film felt global, real, immediate. For the crew, it felt endless. Because The Longest Day refused to simplify history, it forced audiences to read subtitles, to work for understanding, just like the soldiers did. Richard Todd didn't just play Major John Howard. In real life, Todd had been there, a young paratrooper in the 7th Parachute Battalion, fighting under Howard's command during the actual invasion. Now, 17 years later, he was playing the man who'd commanded him, recreating the mission he'd survived. Todd called it the strangest deja vu imaginable. Between takes, he'd correct historical details, telling directors where soldiers actually stood, how they moved. The crew listened. Todd wasn't acting from a script, he was acting from memory. During one scene, Todd paused mid-line and stared at the set. A crew member asked if he was okay. Todd nodded and said quietly, "I remember this, exactly like this." Because The Longest Day blurred the line between history and cinema, casting survivors to play their own commanders. John Wayne wasn't fond of being told what to do, especially by 5 different directors. When British director Ken Anakin tried giving Wayne detailed instructions on how to limp, Wayne stopped mid-rehearsal and snapped, "Son, I've been limping through pictures since before you had a camera." The crew went silent. Tension spread across the set. Other directors started treating Wayne with kid gloves, which only made things worse. Zanuck intervened. He gathered all 5 directors and announced a new protocol. John Wayne wouldn't be directed, he'd be collaborated with. Directors could suggest, they could request it, but they couldn't command. Wayne approved. Filming resumed, because in The Longest Day, there was only room for one general named Wayne, and he didn't take orders from anyone who hadn't earned their stripes. At $10 million, The Longest Day became one of the most expensive films ever made. Zanuck joked he could have liberated Europe again for less. The money went to recreate an invasion. 23,000 extras paid daily. Hundreds of ships, tanks, and aircraft. Enough ammunition blanks to arm a small country. The production employed entire towns. The French military provided logistical support. The British loaned equipment. It was less a film production and more a multinational military exercise with cameras. Historians later calculated that, adjusted for inflation, The Longest Day's budget approached what some smaller D-Day operations actually cost in 1944. The difference? The real invasion lasted 1 day. Zanuck's lasted months. To capture authentic parachute footage, cinematographer Jean Bourgoin strapped a 40-pound camera to his chest and jumped out of a plane at 1,200 feet. The plan was simple: free fall, deploy, shoot, film descending paratroopers, and land safely. His parachute deployed but tangled mid-descent. Lines twisted, canopy half collapsed. Bourgoin plummeted faster than planned, the camera still rolling. He hit the ground hard, felt ribs crack. The camera survived. Bourgoin barely did. Medics rushed over. Bourgoin, gasping, asked if the footage was intact. It was. Zanuck reviewed it that night and kept every frame. The sequence appears in the film, the wobbling perspective terrifyingly real. Bourgoin recovered after 2 weeks. He never jumped again, because The Longest Day demanded realism, even when realism meant risking lives for 90 seconds of footage. The German military consultants weren't happy. Hired to ensure historical accuracy for the Wehrmacht sequences, they watched dailies and grew increasingly agitated. They accused Zanuck of portraying German soldiers as incompetent, cowardly, and unprepared. One advisor, a former Wehrmacht officer who'd actually commanded troops at Normandy, demanded extensive script changes. sequences. He wanted scenes showing German tactical brilliance, their superior defensive positions, their disciplined response to the invasion. Zanuck sat through a 45-minute presentation detailing German military achievements. He listened politely, nodding occasionally, letting the advisor finish his entire argument. Then he leaned back in his chair and said simply, "You already lost the war. I'm just filming it." The room went silent. The advisor's face reddened. He started to protest, but Zanuck cut him off. "The Allies won. That's history. I'm not rewriting it to make anyone feel better about losing." End of discussion. The consultants stayed on payroll, cashing their checks, but they stopped offering suggestions. Zanuck didn't change a single frame. The German sequences remained as written. Soldiers caught off guard, overwhelmed by the scale of the invasion, fighting bravely in individual moments, but ultimately doomed by strategic failure. Because The Longest Day wasn't interested in rewriting history to soothe egos or rehabilitate reputations, it was interesting in showing what actually happened. To recreate troop movements with absolute precision, Zanuck needed military maps showing exact Allied positions, German defensive layouts, and naval approach routes. The problem? In 1961, these maps were still classified by the US and British governments. Operational details from D-Day, including specific landing coordinates and deception strategies, remained state secrets considered too sensitive for public release. Zanuck pulled every string he had. He contacted Pentagon officials, made personal calls to the British War Office, leveraged his Hollywood connections and the film's patriotic intentions. He argued that the film would honor the veterans, that accuracy mattered more than secrecy 17 years after the fact. Somehow, incredibly, he got the maps. Military officials hand-delivered sealed packages to the production office. Production designers studied them obsessively, using them to build sets, choreograph battle scenes, and position extras with military precision. But there were conditions. After filming wrapped, the US government sent officials to collect everything. They arrived on set with a checklist, original maps, photographic copies, reference negatives, even designer sketches based on the layouts. They made Zanuck sign documents swearing under penalty that no copies remained anywhere. Military intelligence treated it like retrieving nuclear codes. For once, Hollywood's spoilers were literally a matter of national security. The irony? Within 5 years, most of those maps were declassified and published in mainstream history books, available to anyone with a library card. But in 1962, The Longest Day briefly possessed military secrets and had to give them back under armed escort, because some films don't just recreate history, they accidentally possess it, borrow it under guard, then hand it back when the cameras stop rolling. French officials weren't happy. After watching early cuts of The Longest Day, they filed formal complaints that French soldiers received too little screen time, that the film centered American and British heroism while minimizing France's role in liberating its own country. It wasn't just casual criticism. Diplomatic cables were sent between Paris and Los Angeles. French cultural ministers contacted 20th Century Fox executives directly. Zanuck was summoned to Paris to explain himself in person. He arrived prepared. Zanuck brought detailed breakdowns, exact screen time by nationality, line counts for each army, heroic moments cataloged and timed. He demonstrated correctly that he'd given French resistance fighters and soldiers more dialogue than American troops in several key scenes. He'd hired French directors for French sequences. He'd filmed in France with French crews, but perception mattered more than data. French newspapers published scathing reviews before the film even premiered, calling it a Yankee version of D-Day and accusing Hollywood of rewriting history to favor American audiences. Critics complained that the film made liberation look like an American gift rather than a French struggle. Some theaters in Paris initially refused to screen it. Zanuck didn't budge. He didn't re-edit to add more French scenes. He didn't apologize or promise changes for international cuts. He stood by his version, arguing that the film showed D-Day as it happened, not as national pride wished it had happened. The controversy raged for months, with French critics and American defenders trading barbs in the international press. Eventually, audiences decided. French viewers packed theaters despite the official criticism drawn by the film's scope and authenticity. But the tension revealed a fundamental truth about historical cinema. History, it seems, is always written by whoever gets the final cut, and in 1962, that was Darryl F. Zanuck. Every ship, tank, and aircraft you see was real or built full scale. No miniatures, no matte paintings. Zanuck demanded physical authenticity, so production crews scoured military surplus yards across Europe, purchased decommissioned warships, refurbished tanks, and convinced NATO to loan landing craft. Old destroyers were pulled from retirement, repainted with invasion markings, and sent back to war. Locals along the Corsican coast watched as the shoreline filled with dozens of ships. For a few days in 1961, Corsica looked ready for invasion all over again. The logistics required actual military planners. Insurance on loaned equipment ran into 6 figures, but the result remains one of the most authentic invasion sequences ever captured. Because The Longest Day refused shortcuts. If history used real ships, so would the film. The Paris premiere on September 25th, 1962 didn't look like a Hollywood event. It looked like a military parade. The audience wasn't packed with critics and celebrities. It was filled with generals, veterans, and diplomats. Uniforms outnumbered tuxedos 3-1. When the final credits rolled, the audience stood in silence. Then Darryl Zanuck rose and saluted. The veterans saluted back. Some cried. Others stared at the screen, processing what they'd watched. For once, a Hollywood ending came with medals, tears, and the weight of memory made visible. During filming, Darryl Zanuck worked 20-hour days, 7 days a week for months. He coordinated 5 directors who barely spoke to each other, managed 23,000 extras across multiple countries, supervised construction of entire fake towns, reviewed dailies every night, and personally oversaw every frame of the edit. Crew members joked that their longest day lasted months. Zanuck was first on set every morning and last to leave every night. By wrap, he'd lost 20 pounds, his hair had grayed, and he slept 4 hours a night. When budget overruns threatened production, he mortgaged personal assets to keep cameras rolling. By wrap time, everyone looked like they'd actually fought a war, but Zanuck just moved to the editing room and started the next battle, because The Longest Day earned its title not just in the story it told, but in the brutal, relentless making of it. When The Longest Day wrapped, Darryl Zanuck commissioned commemorative medals for every principal actor, complete with ribbons and engraved names. When the boxes arrived, every medal was misspelled. Instead of Operation Overlord, they read Operation Overload. Zanuck laughed. It was too late to reorder. The wrap party was that night. He gave them out anyway. John Wayne wore his proudly telling guests, "Overload fits just fine." That's exactly what this production was. The typo became a perfect symbol of a production that truly overloaded everything: budget, ambition, and sanity. By the 1990s, nearly every major star from The Longest Day had passed away. John Wayne died in 1979, Henry Fonda in 1982, Richard Burton in 1984, Robert Mitchum in 1997. One by one, the men who'd stormed fictional beaches disappeared, leaving behind only their performances frozen in black and white. But the film kept marching on, restored, reissued, studied by historians and film students. Modern war directors like Steven Spielberg and Christopher Nolan cite it as the blueprint for large-scale realism. Spielberg referenced its multi-perspective structure when planning Saving Private Ryan. Military academies from West Point to Sandhurst screen it to teach leadership under chaos. The film outlived not just its stars, but the generation that fought the actual war. Veterans brought their grandchildren to anniversary screenings. Historians debate its accuracy while acknowledging its influence on how the world visualizes D-Day, because some films don't just depict history, they become part of it, outlasting their casts, their studios, even their original audiences. The Longest Day became the visual vocabulary for an event most people will never experience but need to understand. When The Longest Day premiered in 1962, critics didn't quite know what to do with it. It was too long, too expensive, too sprawling. But audiences packed theaters for months. Now it's studied in film schools and military academies alike. Directors still reference its battle choreography. Veterans show it to their grandchildren, pointing at the screen and saying, "That's what it looked like." It was built on obsession, on 23,000 extras storming real beaches, on 5 directors barely speaking to each other, John Wayne limping through explosions at 54, on veterans reliving their nightmares for the cameras. In a world full of slick, sanitized war films, The Longest Day still stands alone, exhausting, authentic, uncompromising. Because some films aren't built for comfort, they're built to remind you what history actually cost.